Hey guys, it's Quirky Turtle here, and this is episode 2 of my beginner's guide for Ember Knights. So in this video, I'll be talking about my skills tier list, which will be in the later half of the video, and then difficulty modifiers. So there's 3 different difficulty modifiers. They all do slightly different things. Generally, normal is just the normal difficulty. There's no other buffs or nerfs. On hard mode, you take 25% more damage. So let's say a Rotworm normally does 24 damage. He'll deal 30 damage here, like you see. So quite a big increase. And then easy is the opposite, so you take 20% less damage. However, there's a scaling factor. So every time you lose a run consecutively, you get another 10% damage reduction. So it's very useful if you are really struggling at the game. Just play on easy. Once you die a couple times, it'll almost be impossible to die after dying 8 times in a row, or 6 times in a row, I guess, to get that 80%. It does max out at 80% damage reduction. This is my tier list of all of the skills and how useful they really are, and basically how good they are, and or if they're very situational, they're just average. It's a good choice, it's the absolute best, or it's the absolute worst. So let's jump right into it. I'm going to start with Arcane Bolts. Arcane Bolts is a very solid choice, except it's not just a solid choice, it is the best. It has 3 charges. It also has a really low refresh of 10, which is very easy. And when you perfect it, you get 2 extra bolts instead of the normal 3. It's also just one of my favorite skills. It's also in the meta for speedrunning right now. And yeah, it's definitely the best choice. So let's move on to Arcane Orb. It's the default skill for the mage, aka the staff or Nexal staff. And I would put it roughly like average because it's not great. It has a lot of damage when you perfect it. The refresh is only 10 and it has 2 charges, but it's just, it doesn't feel good to use necessarily, although it does have good AoE damage. It's also, you can only get it on the Nexal staff, so it's gonna have to sit at average. Moving on is the dice. It is one of my favorite skills. However, it's not that good in all reality because it's literally a gamble. You have a 1 in 6 chance to roll a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A 1 gives you a buff, a damage buff. Number 2 is a mini cyclone. Number 3 is a skill refresh. Number 4 is a heal, which will heal you for 10% of your max HP. Number 5 is a lightning strike. And then 6 is the meteor shower, which does a ton of damage. Now, I really like the dice, but it's gonna be very situational. Like, if you're going on a run where you're putting on Shared Fate and co-op because, I don't know, you decide let's try Shared Fate, sure, it's a great choice because then you heal for basically 20% of your max HP, because each person heals for 10% of each person's health. So combined, if you're doing it as a duo, you heal for 20% HP. So I'm going to put it as very situational. It also has a pretty low refresh of 12, but there's only 1 charge. So it's going to just sit very situational. Moving on to Ballista. Ballista has a refresh of 20, which is one of the highest in the game. And there is 2 charges, so it does kind of make up for the fact that the refresh is 20. It does pretty good damage. Just tapping it, it does 8 damage. Perfecting it, it does 12 damage. Pretty good. It does do good with certain relics, like Decayed Scepter, where the first shots will poison an enemy, and or Brittle Scepter. When you perfect it, it will freeze any enemy that it hits. But I'm going to put it at probably could be worse. Yeah, I'm going to leave it at could be worse. It might change later on, but it's going to be sitting at could be worse. It's just, I don't like it. I don't use it very often. It seems very situational, but it's also just like it could take the heat off you because enemies can target it instead of you. So I don't know. It's gonna sit. Could be worse for now. Moving on to the blast bomb. The blast bomb has a ton of damage. It's probably a solid choice if I have to put it somewhere right now. The refresh is 12. Yes, there's only one charge, but the damage is off the charts. Just by tapping it, it does 50 damage. Charging it but not perfecting it does 60 damage, and perfecting it does 70 damage. It has a ton of damage, a ton of AoE. It's a great skill if you're trying to scale your skill damage. So I'm gonna put it solid choice. Now onto one of my favorite weapons, or not weapons, skills, which is the Chakram. Now the Chakram did get nerfed in the last update, where now it has one charge, but it used to have two charges. The refresh is still 12, and it also got reduced by one bounce on perfect, which I haven't really noticed as a big issue, so I'm going to put it at the best, since it does kind of seek out enemies. Once it hits an enemy, it'll go towards another enemy and bounce around. One of my favorite skills, refresh of 12, one charge, and the damage is pretty okay. Like, it's not amazing by any means, but using Brittle Scepter with it and Frostbites, you can deal a ton of damage. Also, super meta in speedrunning right now, so it's going to go to the best. Cloak and Dagger is a decent skill, but I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it. It's kind of situational, because what it does is you use it, you disappear from line of sight, and you can use like a melee attack, which will weaken bosses and mini bosses. And it's just, I feel like it's very situational, and I don't get a lot of use out of it. However, with Guard Scepter, instead of just using the skill once, like when you perfect it, you gain 5 armor, you can do that technically twice by activating it once. It also has a fairly high refresh of 15, and only has one charge. So yeah, I'm going to leave it at very situational. Cyclone is a solid choice. It's not the best, but it's a solid choice. Being able to pull in a bunch of enemies is always nice, especially when you're melee units or have a good AoE weapon like the Razor Wind, for example, or the Hammer. It also has a fairly low refresh of 12 and one charge. The damage is kind of good. Normally, if you just tap the skill, it does 25 damage. Charging it but not perfecting it does 30 damage, and perfect does 35 damage. It does damage like over time. I don't know the increments, but it seems to hit enemies like 4 or 5 times when you perfect it, at least. Moving on to Ember Fire. I highly dislike this skill, like really dislike it, but I have to put it in very situational because it does have a low refresh of 8, and it has 2 charges now. The damage isn't crazy, but it's also the range on it is just very short. It's good if you need healing, aka cook food. Like, that's kind of all I see it for. And yeah, I'm just going to leave it in very situational. Basically, it's if you don't have any sort of healing and you want to cook food to get more health out of food. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it as very situational. Not my favorite skill by any means. Eruption, I'm going to also put it at... Actually, no, I'm going to put it at could be worse. I don't really like Eruption. It's kind of like a weird one. Yes, it burns. And it also, when you perfect it, it does multiple burn like effects or waves, I guess. It just doesn't seem very good. It has a refresh of 15 and a charge of 1. It's just not my favorite by any means. It's just like, if you get it, whatever. I'm not gonna choose it over like, let's say, Blast Bomb or Dice, but it could be worse. Like, it is what it is. Now, Frostwall, that's the worst. I hate Frostwall with a burning passion. It's just so bad. The damage isn't really there. Like, normal, just tapping the wall, it does 20 damage. Charging it, it does 25 damage. Perfecting it, it does 30 damage. Yes, it freezes enemies, but the refresh is 15 and it has 1 charge. It doesn't seem worthwhile for the fact that it freezes like 1 or 2 enemies in a straight line, and then it's gone, and then you have to recharge it. Like, I hate it. There's so many things that are better. Moving on to Gravity Well, one of the newer skills that just got added in 1.1. I'd put it as a solid choice. It's pretty much Cyclone, but does more damage, and it's like a one-time use kind of thing. So you use it, it quickly sucks in enemies and deals damage, and then it's gone. It has a recharge of 15, and it has 1 charge. The damage on it is pretty good. Normally it's 12 damage, charge it's 18, and perfect it's 24. It's a pretty balanced skill, so I'm going to leave it at solid choice. Hailstone, I find it very average. Like, yeah, it's good if you're using a melee character so that you can freeze enemies, and or you can basically negate a hit, because if you're just running at the enemy that's charging an attack at you or something like that, you freeze it and it stops the animation and the attack altogether. Very useful. It does have a refresh of 15 and 1 charge. However, when you perfect it, you get 5 snowballs around you instead of the 3. So it's alright, and when you use the skill, it will deal 5 damage per snowball when you throw the snowballs, if you ever do that. Otherwise, they will kind of time out and just shoot off in random directions. So I'm going to leave it at an average. Now, Judgment, it did get a big buff, but I think it also kind of got a nerf, and I dislike it a lot. Like, it is kind of terrible. The refresh on it is 12, which, yeah, it's pretty low, but it has 1 charge, and yes, the damage is kind of crazy, but it just, I can't justify the damage for how bad this skill is. Like, the AoE is just not good. When you perfect it, you get 3 bolts of lightning that deal 30 damage. So you deal 90 damage, but it's over a big range, so you're not hitting one enemy for 90, you're hitting like 3 enemies or 1 enemy for like 30. Like, it's not good. So I'm just gonna throw it at the absolute worst. It might move up to could be worse, but I doubt it. Now, Knight's Charge used to be one of the best skills, but it kind of fell off when it lost one of its charges. But I'm gonna still put it at solid choice. Its refresh is 12 and it has 1 charge, but when you perfect Knight's Charge, you gain 5 refresh, so then the refresh goes down to 7 if you always perfect it, which keeps it as a really solid choice if you're going some sort of skill build, or if you're using a melee champion and you need to get into a fight or get close range to enemies. It's very good. It will also stun enemies, which is super helpful with negating attacks taken, or just enemies are charging an attack at you. You quickly dash in, stun them, it stops their attack entirely. Super useful. So I'm going to leave it at a solid choice. Moving on to the only poison skill, Phantom Spear has a refresh of 15 and 1 charge. I don't like it. It seems very, like, niche. Like, it's very situational. So I'm going to throw it in very situational. If you have some sort of poison build going, aka Infested Mind, maybe it might be worth it, but chances are you're going to have a Decayed Scepter, and therefore it becomes obsolete. So then I'm going to throw it down to could be worse. The damage on it's not great if the numbers are accurate. It does 20 damage, then 25 damage on a charge, and perfect it does 30. And once again, it's a straight line, so being able to line up a bunch of enemies is kind of hard, especially have move speed or anything like that increased. Rupture. We're down to the last 3. Rupture can be really good, but I find it very situational, as in the AoE of it is very, like, big. It has a big range, but I can't justify the charge time on it to do it. It just takes so long to charge it. And the refresh is 15 and it has 1 charge. The damage isn't crazy by any means. Once again, it's kind of average damage. Normal cast, it's 20. Charge cast is 25. And perfect, it's 30. It does stun in a big AoE, which I find super cool. Like, it's not It could be worse, pretty much, right? But I'll leave it in very situational. If you're doing some sort of stun build where you deal a ton of damage on stun, Rupture might be that skill that'll fit that build. Soul Siphon. I haven't played around with Soul Siphon very much, so I'm going to throw it in average, because it doesn't seem bad, but it doesn't seem good. And there's 12 refresh on it, so fairly low refresh. And there's one charge with damage of normal cast 24, charge cast 42, and perfect 48. It also increases damage when you hit an enemy with it. Now, I don't know if that's for a duration or if it's a flat increase to the skill. If it is a flat increase to the skill, I might move it up to solid choice. But as of right now, I do not believe that it's a flat increase and or permanent. So I'm going to just throw it in average. Onto the last skill, which is Warrior Wisps. There's a refresh of 20 on it, and it has 2 charges. It has one of the highest refreshes, and it has 2 charges. So it's kind of like the Ballista, and it's, in my opinion, it's very situational, but it's also like very bad. Like, I don't like it. I'm gonna just put it at it could be worse, because it's definitely better than Frostwall. It's hard to throw it at could be worse because it could be very situational as well. It does give you other status effects because each wisp has a status effects. You can get a poison one, a fire one, lightning, and freeze wisps. Now, when you perfect it, they gain more health. Yeah, I'm going to leave it there. Now, I'm going to quickly look over everything. So, in the best tier, it goes Arcane Bolts, Chakram. In a solid choice, it's Blast Bomb, Cyclone, Black Hole, or Gravity Well, and Knight's Charge. On the average, it's Arcane Orb, Hailstone Armor, and Soul Siphon. Very situational. I have Arlen's Dice, Cloak and Dagger, Ember Fire, and Rupture. Could be worse. I have Ballista, Eruption, Phantom Sphere, and Warrior Wisps. Now, in the absolute worst tier is Frostwall and Judgment. This is my tier list for all of the skills and my opinions on all of them. Now, take it with a grain of salt, because obviously you might enjoy using the Frostwall or Warrior Wisps. If you do enjoy that skill, just keep using it. Don't let me change your opinion, but this is my opinion as a speedrunner, and if you are a beginner trying to use these skills, I will advise you to use the skills in the first 2 tiers, which would be Arcane Bolt, Chakram, Blast Bomb, Cyclone, Gravity Well, and Knight's Charge, just because they're so universal and they allow you to basically either one-shot enemies, which is Arcane Bolts, like one cast will probably kill an enemy, so it's high damage, or Cyclone and Gravity Well allow you to pull in enemies close together so you can deal more AoE damage, and Knight's Charge will stun enemies, allowing you to hit them without any repercussions, making them super useful for beginners learning how to get through rooms. That was episode 2 of my beginner's guide. If you've enjoyed this video and or if it's helped you, please leave a like. And if you want to see more content like this to follow this series or watch any of my speedruns or anything else, subscribe so you never miss any new videos from me, and I'll see you guys in the next one.